Silence swallows the penthouse hallway at 2:27 in the morning. Emma Hale stands frozen in her bedroom doorway, 4 years old, with blonde curls matted to her tear-streaked face, her frozen pajama soaked dark with urine. She doesn't scream anymore. Her small body just trembles, waiting for the blow that always comes, the way children learn to anticipate pain, the way plants learn to turn toward the sun. Douglas Hale's shadow looms behind her, his fist raised, his breath reeking of whiskey and rage. His voice slurs through the darkness, each word a weapon. You pathetic little brat. Can't even make it to the goddamn bathroom. His hand begins to fall. But Nora Hartley doesn't think. She moves. Her bare feet slap against cold marble as she bolts from the converted closet on the first floor, the room that isn't technically a bedroom because it was built for storage, shelves still carved into the walls, the ceiling so low she has to crouch to change her clothes. She takes the main staircase 3 steps at a time, her heart hammering against her ribs like something trying to escape her chest. 11 seconds. That is all it takes her to reach Emma's room. Nora positions her body between the child and Douglas, like a shield made of flesh and desperation. Her voice stays steady, though terror floods through her veins in waves. Mr. Hale, Emma had an accident. I'll handle it. Let me handle it. Douglas's bloodshot eyes fix on her with the weight of a predator who knows his prey cannot run. His lip curls, exposing teeth stained with whiskey residue. This is MY house. MY child. You're just the help. But Nora doesn't move. Doesn't flinch. Her arms wrap around Emma's shaking body as she backs slowly toward the bathroom, each step deliberate, her voice never wavering even as her hands shake. I understand, Mr. Hale. I'll clean her up. You should rest. She closes the bathroom door. Locks it. Emma begins to cry, not the loud wailing of a child who doesn't understand pain, but the silent weeping of one who has learned that noise only makes things worse. Nora turns on the shower. Warm water. Steam. She kneels beside the bathtub as Emma steps under the flow, and she whispers the only truth she can offer, you are safe now. You are safe. But even as she says it, her eyes catch the reflection in the fogged mirror, her own face, aged decades by hardship, her left cheekbone still blooming purple with a bruise that makeup barely conceals, her shoulders curved inward like she has learned to take up as little space as possible in the world. Across the city, in a blacked-out SUV parked in the shadows beneath Caruso Tower, Luca Caruso sits motionless in the back seat, reviewing security footage on a screen the size of a dinner plate. The glow casts sharp lines across his face, a face that has seen violence the way most people have seen weather, ordinary and expected. His skin is olive dark, his hair jet black with threads of silver at the temples, his eyes the color of a storm sky. A thin scar runs from the corner of his left eye down to his jawline, a permanent reminder of a lesson learned at age 16. He is 34 years old and he owns the city. Every restaurant, every nightclub, every protection racket that bleeds money from small business owners like a leech bleeds blood. He is feared. He is respected. He has never once been questioned. But for 3 days, he has been watching Nora Hartley. It started at the private school pickup on Monday. Emma Hale standing beside her mother Rachel Dawson, who was dressed in a cream-colored suit that cost more than Nora's annual salary, her blonde hair perfect, her smile precise. And beside her, moving like a ghost, quiet, faithful, invisible, stood Nora, 31 years old but looking like she had lived 1,000 years of suffering in that single face. Luca noticed the way she moved. A slight limp in her left leg. The way she favored her right shoulder. The concealer that didn't quite hide the bruise on her left cheekbone. The hunger in her eyes when Emma mentioned stopping for ice cream, how Nora's fingers tightened on the child's hand, how her lips pressed into a line. He noticed because Luca Caruso was 6 years old the first time he stood between his mother and his father's fist. He was 7 when his mother died from injuries that the hospital report listed as accidental fall. He was 8 when he learned that some people prey on those who cannot fight back, the way wolves hunt deer. He has spent 26 years building an empire so that no one under his protection would ever experience that same helplessness. Carlo leans forward from the back seat, his massive frame somehow graceful despite his size. He is 42, with silver threaded through his dark beard, his suit tailored black wool, his tie a burgundy silk that matches the house wine at Luca's restaurant. Boss, that's the 4th time this week he's gone after the kid. Should I call the team? Luca's jaw tightens. On the screen, Nora shields Emma, positioning her body like a wall between a 4-year-old and a man whose rage has consumed every other thought in his skull. Nora doesn't fight. She simply stands. Simply says his name like it is a spell that can break curses. Not yet, Luca says, his voice deep and solid like an oath. I want to know everything. Where she goes when she leaves that house. Who she sees. What she needs. Nino, the second lieutenant, sits to Luca's right. He is younger, 31, with the kind of face that looks innocent until you see his eyes. His hands rest on his thighs, patient, waiting for orders like a dog waiting for a command. There's more, boss. We pulled her financial records. She's got $34 in her checking account. That's everything. Her rent is due in 2 weeks. $35,000. She doesn't have it. There's a debt collector's letter at her apartment. Final notice. They're evicting her in 19 days. The SUV goes very quiet. Through the tinted windows, San Francisco's lights blur past like scattered diamonds. The hum of the engine fills the silence, a sound like waiting, like the moment before a storm. Luca sets down the phone. His hands are large, scarred, weighted with gold rings that have intimidated more men than most people meet in a lifetime. On his left wrist, a Rolex watch catches the light, worth more than Nora will earn in 5 years of working as a live-in nanny. Get me everything. Her family history. Her medical records. The Hale family finances. I want to know if her employer has ever been reported to Child Protective Services. Already have it, Carlo says, handing him a manila folder the color of old bone. 3 reports in the last 2 years. All were dismissed. Rachel Dawson is on the board of the Children's Hospital. She donates money. People like that don't get investigated. They get protected. Luca opens the folder. Police reports. Caseworker dismissals. A photograph of Emma taken during a welfare check, her eyes hollow, her thumb still in her mouth despite being 4 years old. Another photograph, Nora at age 25, laughing, her eyes full of light that has been systematically extinguished in the years since. He does not ask how Carlo obtained these photographs. There are things Luca Caruso knows that other people forget to ask. Send word to the team. I want a 2-car rotation on the Hale penthouse, day and night. And I want someone on her personally. Anyone lays a hand on her, I want to know about it within 5 minutes. Carlo nods. In 15 years of working for Luca Caruso, he has learned that when the boss speaks in that particular tone, steady, measured, absolute, the world is about to change. Mountains will move. Empires will crumble. Men will disappear into the fog without leaving a trace. But what neither Carlo nor Nino understood in that moment was that Luca's obsession with Nora Hartley had nothing to do with business. It had nothing to do with territory or profit or the kind of power that can be measured in dollars and fear. It had to do with recognition. It had to do with looking at another human being and seeing yourself reflected back, the same helplessness, the same sacrifice, the same quiet courage in the face of an enemy you cannot defeat. 3 nights earlier, the rain had fallen on San Francisco like a curse. The kind of rain that doesn't come down but instead crashes, that turns streets into rivers and makes people question whether staying alive is worth the suffering. The November wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice, cutting through anything that tried to stand against it. Nora's 2003 Honda Civic, a color that might have once been silver but had faded to the gray of old teeth, sat on the shoulder of Highway 101 with its engine dead. The check engine light had been glowing for 3 weeks. She had ignored it because she couldn't afford to fix it, the way people ignore pain when they don't have money for doctors. But on this night, with the rain hammering against the windshield and the wipers moving back and forth like they were trying to escape, the engine simply quit. She sat gripping the steering wheel, water dripping from her hair onto her lap. Her phone had 2% battery. She was wearing a waitress uniform from the all-night diner where she picked up shifts, her shoes soaked through, and she had exactly $34 in her purse. The current in her chest wasn't hope. She had learned to recognize the difference between hope and desperation a long time ago. She was about to call a tow truck she couldn't afford when the convoy appeared through the rain. 3 black SUVs, each the size of a small apartment building, each with tinted windows that revealed nothing of what waited inside. They pulled off the highway and formed a semicircle around her car, trapping her in place the way predators trap prey. The door of the middle SUV opened. Luca Caruso emerged into the rain wearing a charcoal cashmere coat that cost more than her car was worth. His dark hair was soaked instantly, but he didn't seem to notice, his storm grey eyes moving across her vehicle with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. He approached the driver's side window. Nora was frozen, her hand still gripping the steering wheel, her mind calculating the various ways this moment might end in violence. Luca tapped the glass. His knuckles made a sound like thunder. She rolled down the window. The rain immediately soaked her arm. "Your car is broken," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Nora answered, because there was no point in lying when the truth was visible. "I'm calling for a tow truck. In this weather, it will take 40 minutes. Maybe longer. You will be sick by then. You are already trembling." Luca opened the passenger door. The interior light of her car illuminated his face, the scar, the absolute absence of mercy that somehow came paired with the gentlest expression she had ever seen on a man's face. "Get in my car. I will have mine take you wherever you need to go. Carlo will handle your vehicle." Every instinct in Nora's body screamed at her to refuse. She had learned long ago that men who looked like this, powerful, expensive, surrounded by other men in dark suits, were not in the business of rescuing women with nothing to offer in return. But Emma was home with Douglas, and Nora was supposed to work the closing shift at the diner, and she needed the $70 that shift would earn her to eat this week. She got out of the car and climbed into the back seat of Luca Caruso's SUV. The interior was warm. Leather that smelled expensive. And Luca sat beside her, his wet coat dripping onto the seat, his eyes never leaving her face. "What is your name?" he asked. "Nora Hartley." "Where are you going, Nora Hartley?" "The Midnight Diner. On Harbor Street." The driver pulled back onto the highway. Luca didn't ask her any other questions. He simply sat beside her as the rain continued to fall, and somehow his presence made her feel less alone than she had felt in years. But what Nora did not know was that Luca Caruso had already decided her fate. He had seen her bruises. He had seen her fear. He had seen Emma's hollow eyes, and he had made a choice in that moment, a choice that would set in motion a series of events that would destroy 2 people's carefully constructed lives and rebuild 1 woman's shattered world from the ashes. He simply looked at her through the darkness of the car and thought of his 6-year-old self, standing between his mother and his father's fist. Drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a woman with nothing and a man with everything could possibly change each other's lives forever. 3 nights before the penthouse hallway filled with Emma's screams, before Nora Hartley heard those cries and bolted from her converted closet bedroom, before everything changed, she stood on the shoulder of Highway 101 with 4% battery on her phone and no signal reaching back to civilization. The October wind carved through her thin jacket like a blade wrapped in ice. Her 2004 Honda Civic sat 30 feet behind her, hood smoking, engine dead as a stone. She had been walking for 27 minutes in her work flats, and her heels were bleeding inside her stockings. Every breath came out visible in the cold, white clouds that dissolved into nothing. The darkness of the highway stretched in both directions. No other cars. No lights except the distant glow of San Francisco's skyline, still miles away through the Marin Headlands. She had called the Hale house 3 times. No answer. Douglas was drinking again. Rachel Dawson was probably there, her voice sharp as broken glass, and they both had made it clear that Nora's problems were not their concern. She heard the engines before she saw the vehicles. 3 black SUVs materialized from the darkness behind her, moving in perfect formation down the highway. Headlights cut through the rain like white spears. Nora's first instinct was to run, but her feet were already screaming with pain and there was nowhere to go. Just empty highway, dark hills, and the sound of 12 cylinders approaching. The lead SUV slowed. Stopped beside her. The rear door opened. He emerged like the night itself had taken human form. 6'3" tall, broad-shouldered, his dark wool coat hanging from him like armor. His face was carved from granite, high cheekbones, a scar running from the corner of his left eye to his jawline, eyes so dark they looked black in the headlight glow. He was 38 years old but carried himself like a man who had lived 1,000 years. His name was Luca Caruso, and he was the most dangerous person in 3 counties. But Nora Hartley didn't know any of that yet. She only saw a man stepping out of a luxury vehicle, approaching her with measured steps. His gaze swept across her soaked clothes, her trembling hands, the blood seeping through her stockings. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath. "You're hurt," he said. Nora took a step back. "I'm fine. I just need..." "A tow truck," Luca finished. It wasn't a question. He turned his head slightly toward the lead SUV. "Carlo. Call Romano's. Have them pick up the Honda." A man with silver-threaded hair and a broken nose leaned out the driver's side window. He nodded without speaking. This was how things worked in Luca Caruso's world. You didn't ask why. You did what he said. Luca turned back to Nora. "What's the address?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to be. "Russian Hill. The Hale penthouse." Something flickered behind Luca's eyes. Just for an instant. He knew Douglas Hale. Knew the rumors. Knew the type of man who hired live-in help and paid them in humiliation. But his expression didn't change. "Get in." "It's not a request." Nora hesitated. The wind cut through her wet clothes again, and she could see the lights of the city still miles away. She could feel cold seeping into her bones like it was trying to freeze her from the inside out. She climbed into the back of the SUV. The interior smelled like leather and expensive cologne. The seats were heated. A man Nora hadn't seen before, younger than the driver, with kind eyes and a scar across his neck, handed her a wool blanket from the front seat. "Thank you," she whispered. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. Her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. Luca sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his attention absolute. He studied her the way a general studies a battlefield. This woman was thin. Not fashionably thin. Survival thin. Her fingernails were bitten to the quick. Her hair, even soaked, showed the pale blonde of someone who hadn't seen a salon in years. But her eyes, despite the exhaustion, despite the fear, held a kind of light that most people never developed. "How long have you worked for the Hales?" he asked. 8 months. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Live in. I take care of Emma. She's 4. The way she said the child's name, with such tenderness, such bone-deep exhaustion, made Luca's jaw tighten. His hands, resting on his thighs, clenched into fists. He closed his eyes for just a moment. He was 6 years old again. Standing in a 2-room apartment in the Tenderloin. His mother on the ground. His father's shadow rising above her. His own voice screaming, small and useless. The feeling of powerlessness, that was the worst kind of death. That was the thing that never left you, not really, not even after you'd built an empire from blood and strategy and the broken backs of lesser men. He'd made a vow on his mother's grave. No child would suffer the way he had suffered. No child would stand where he had stood. When he opened his eyes again, Nora was watching him with confusion written across her face. She didn't understand why a stranger was looking at her like she mattered. She didn't understand yet that her fate had already been decided the moment she'd stepped into this vehicle. "What is your name?" Luca asked, though his surveillance team had already told him. He needed to hear it from her mouth. "Nora Hartley. And Emma's father. That's Douglas. My employer." Luca nodded slowly. The pieces were already moving on the chessboard of his mind. He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing in the dim interior of the SUV. He typed a single message to his security director, a man named Vincent who had worked for him for 12 years. "Eyes on the Hale penthouse. Russian Hill. 24/7. Everything. Financial records. Personnel files. Behavioral patterns. I want to know every move that man makes." The response came within 15 seconds, "Already on it, boss." "What are we looking for?" Luca didn't respond. He already knew what they would find. Men like Douglas Hale always had the same diseases. Cruelty. Entitlement. The kind of predatory nature that fed on people who couldn't fight back. The convoy pulled up to the Hale building at 12:34 a.m. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors. Lights glowed behind floor-to-ceiling windows. Even from the street, Nora could feel the weight of that place pressing down on her. She moved to return the blanket, but Luca stopped her with a single gesture. "Keep it," he said. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a business card. Cream-colored stock, so thick it felt substantial between her fingers. No name. Just a single phone number embossed in gold lettering. That was how Luca Caruso conducted his business. Anyone who needed to reach him would already know who he was. "If you ever need help," he said, "call that number." Nora stared at the card. At this stranger who had rescued her from the highway. At this man whose presence had made her feel less alone than she'd felt in years. She looked up at his face, at the scar, at the eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine. "Why?" she asked. Luca's gaze held hers for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "Because someone should have helped me once, and no one did." She took the card. It was still warm from his coat pocket. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know that Luca Caruso had already begun the process of dismantling Douglas Hale's life piece by piece. She didn't know that his men were moving into position, that financial records were being accessed, that every secret Douglas had buried was about to be unearthed. She only knew that she was warm for the first time in months. That someone had looked at her and seen something worth saving. She climbed out of the SUV with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. As the black vehicles pulled away from the curb, the youngest one, Nino, the one with the kind eyes, turned to Luca. "Boss, you're taking personal interest in the nanny." That's necessary," Luca finished. And in that moment, with the city lights reflecting off his face, every man in that vehicle understood that something had changed. The boss didn't involve himself in people's problems. The boss made calculated decisions. The boss was made of ice and strategy and the kind of ruthlessness that kept empires standing. But something in his chest had cracked open the moment he'd seen her bleeding on the shoulder of that highway. And what neither Nora nor Luca knew was that Rachel Dawson, Douglas Hale's co-conspirator, his lover, the woman who had orchestrated half of his cruelty, was already aware that someone was asking questions about her family's finances. She would soon become very interested in knowing who was asking. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. The candlelit restaurant fell silent except for the sound of Nora's breathing, shallow, frightened, the breath of someone drowning in air. Luca sat motionless across from her, his expression carved from stone, his dark eyes tracking every tremor in her hands, every flinch when she moved her ribs. Carlo and Nino stood by the kitchen entrance like sentries, watching their boss with expression somewhere between shock and recognition of a line being crossed that could never be uncrossed. Nora's voice came out fractured. "He's going to realize I'm gone. When he goes to check on Emma, when he finds my door." "He's asleep," Luca said. His voice carried the weight of certainty. Nino watched him finish his third bottle of whiskey at 10:43. He'll be unconscious for at least 6 hours. That gives us time. Time for what? Nora's eyes darted toward the door like a trapped animal measuring the distance to escape. You don't understand. Rachel, his sister, she has custody papers. Legal documents. If I leave Emma there, then Emma stays protected. Luca leaned forward, his forearms flat on the white tablecloth. But you leave. Tonight. Right now. The word no formed on Nora's lips, but Luca continued as if she hadn't spoken. Pack a bag. One bag. What you can carry. We'll have someone retrieve anything else later. But you don't go back to that converted closet. You don't spend another night in that building listening to that man's footsteps in the hallway, wondering if tonight is the night he decides drunk rage requires more than words. Nora stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like nails on bone. You're crazy. I can't just abandon her. Emma needs you alive. Carlo's voice cut through her spiral, steady and final. Not beaten. Not broken. Not disappeared into a situation that gets worse every single day you stay. The restaurant's front door suddenly opened. Wind swept in, carrying the bitter smell of October rain and gasoline from the street. The sound of traffic outside seemed impossibly loud after the intimate quiet of their conversation. Gianna, the hostess, stepped back inside, shaking rain from her hair, her phone already in her hand. Boss, there's a situation at the penthouse, she said. Douglas just left in his car. Driving fast. Heading west toward the marina. Everything in Luca's body went still. Not the still of passivity, but the still of a predator calculating. How long ago? For minutes. Nora's face drained of color. Oh God. Oh God, he woke up. He went to check on me and I wasn't there, Anne. He's drunk, Luca said, but his hand was already reaching for his phone. He's not thinking clearly. He's not even certain where you've gone. The restaurant, Nora whispered. He came here looking for me before. When I worked as a dishwasher. He'll figure it out. Luca was already dialing. Marco, I need the private exit clear in 30 seconds. We're moving. He ended the call and looked directly at Nora, his dark eyes burning with something that made her chest tighten. You're leaving? Right now. Through the kitchen, out the back. Carlo is driving you to a house in Pacific Heights. You pack nothing. You tell no one. You disappear. And Emma. Nora's voice broke on the child's name. What happens to Emma if her drunk uncle comes home angry and I'm not there? Emma has protection you don't know about yet, Carlo said quietly. Nino's been parked in the building's garage for 3 hours. He doesn't leave until that building is secure. It was the way Carlo said it, the absolute finality of it, that made Nora understand these men weren't making suggestions. They were stating facts. They were moving her like chess pieces on a board she was only beginning to understand. The kitchen door swung open. Marco appeared, the night manager, his weathered face creased with concern. Back exit is clear. Car's running. Nora looked from face to face around the table. Luca. Carlo. Nino by the door. Marco waiting with his hand extended toward the kitchen. All of them watching her with the focused intensity of men who didn't do anything half-measured or uncertain. What if I refuse? She asked. Luca stood. He was so tall that even seated he'd seemed contained somehow, but standing, he seemed to fill the entire restaurant, to consume the oxygen. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything Nora had ever owned combined, but it was his presence that was expensive. The weight of it. The density of power that had nothing to do with fabric and everything to do with the kind of man who could make for grown men snap into motion with a single glance. Then you refuse, he said. But you refuse from that house in Pacific Heights where you're safe. You don't refuse from a converted closet where you're a locked door away from a drunk man with access to your body and a basement full of tools. You refuse somewhere that gives you choices again. Real choices. Nora moved toward Marco before she fully realized she was moving. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, her hands trembling so badly she had to grip Marco's arm just to stay vertical. Emma, she said again, but it was different this time. Not a protest but a prayer. Nino is texting me right now, Carlo said, his eyes on his phone. He read aloud, Emma asleep in her bed. Alarm system armed. All clear. Nora nodded. Once. Then she let Marco guide her toward the kitchen. The heat hit her first, ovens running at full temperature, the smell of rosemary and garlic and olive oil thick enough to choke on. Line cooks looked up as they passed, tried not to stare. Marco moved with purpose, pulling her through the maze of stainless steel prep tables and hanging copper pots, the rattle and hiss of an active kitchen making every movement feel urgent and surreal. The back door opened to an alley. A black sedan was running, exhaust vapor rising into the October night like ghosts. Carlo was already outside, his hand open for her. Go, Marco said. Don't look back. Nora looked back anyway, one backward glance through the kitchen doors at Luca standing in the restaurant center, his phone to his ear, his voice low and commanding as he spoke into the receiver, I want eyes on the Hale penthouse. Every angle. If Douglas tries to leave again, I want to know before his foot touches the accelerator. Then Carlo's hand closed around hers, and she was being guided into the sedan's back seat. The door closed with a soft, final click. Through the window, she watched the restaurant recede, the warm candlelight becoming just another small glow in the city's darkness. You're safe now, Carlo said from the driver's seat, pulling into traffic with practiced ease. That's all that matters right now. But Nora wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about Emma sleeping in her small bed on the third floor, about Douglas's hand around her throat earlier that evening, about the fact that this man, Luca Caruso, whoever he was, whatever he was, had somehow known her story before she'd even told it to him. Had known about the $35,000 debt. Had known about the final notice letter. Had known about the impossible mathematics of her poverty. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, Douglas Hale was screaming into his phone at the restaurant's hostess, demanding to know if they'd seen a woman matching Nora's description, if anyone had. But the line had already gone dead. Luca had made a single phone call. One word spoken to Gianna, cooperate with nothing. And in doing so, he had erased Nora Hartley from existence in every place that mattered. She was no longer trackable. No longer findable. No longer a woman, but a ghost that had learned to move through the world invisible again, which was exactly what she'd already been before the night the rain came. The sedan turned a corner. The city lights blurred into abstract streaks of color against the darkness. Somewhere behind them, Nino texted Luca from the building's garage, still secure. The child still sleeping. Waiting for your word. And Luca Caruso, 6'3" tall with scars on his knuckles from before Emma was born, before Nora existed in his world at all, made a decision that would reshape the hierarchy of power in San Francisco. He texted back 2 words, take him down. At 7:23 a.m. on that cold October morning, Nora Hartley stood at the edge of Aquatic Park, her hands gripping the railing so hard her knuckles turned white, the water dark and cold below, the San Francisco Bay spreading out like a grave that had been waiting for her. The wind came off the water in bitter waves, cutting through her thin jacket, carrying with it the smell of salt and something else, the smell of endings. She had been standing there for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of thinking about how easy it would be. How the cold water would feel like relief. How Emma would eventually forget her name. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Emma asked for you this morning. Said you promised to make pancakes with chocolate chips. She's waiting. Nora closed her eyes. That one text, that one image of a 4-year-old girl with golden curls sitting at the kitchen table, her small hands folded in her lap, waiting, it was enough. She stepped back from the railing. Her hands shook as she dialed. Luca answered on the first ring, his voice solid as stone. Where are you? She told him. He said, stay there. I'm coming." What Nora did not know was that Luca Caruso was already in motion. He had been in motion since 6:08 a.m., when Rachel Dawson made her phone call to Douglas Hale and spoke the lies that would become legal documents, bank records, and charges that could bury a woman like a blade through butter. At 7:11 a.m., 12 men in black tactical gear entered the Hale building through 3 separate entrances. They moved like ghosts through hallways, their footsteps muffled, their faces expressionless. Douglas Hale was asleep in his bedroom on the 14th floor, sprawled across Egyptian cotton sheets that cost more than Nora made in 3 months. They dragged him out of bed. He woke to the weight of hands on his arms, the cold air on his bare skin, the realization that something had gone catastrophically wrong. They threw him onto the marble floor of his living room so hard the wind got knocked from his lungs. He looked up and saw Luca Caruso standing above him, and in that moment, Douglas Hale understood that he had made a mistake that could not be undone. Luca crouched down, his scarred knuckles catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. His voice was ice. "You put your hands on her throat. You terrorized a 4-year-old child. You threatened the one woman who kept that little girl safe." Douglas started begging. The words tumbled out desperate and broken. "Please, I didn't." She was. Carlo stepped forward with a phone. He pressed play. Rachel's voice filled the room, crystal clear, laughing as she discussed the fabricated theft charges, as she explained how easy it is to destroy people who have nothing, how legal documents could be created, how a woman with no money has no defense. The audio was so clear you could hear the ice clinking in her drink as she celebrated her cruelty. Luca stood up. The door opened. Vincent Marconi walked in, Douglas's biggest business rival, the man who had been trying to acquire Hale Industries for 3 years. Behind him stood 2 federal agents, their credentials visible, their expressions blank. Vincent smiled like a shark. "Mr. Hale, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering. We have all the documentation. Courtesy of an anonymous tip." Douglas's face drained of color. "What? No. That's not." The agents moved with practiced efficiency. They cuffed him. As they dragged him toward the door, he made the mistake of looking back at Luca, and in that moment he understood the true nature of what was happening. This was not death. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. This was 40 years in federal prison. This was every asset seized, every dollar frozen, every business connection severed. This was his name becoming synonymous with failure and crime. This was systematic destruction. At 8:15 a.m., Rachel Dawson sat at her executive desk on the 42nd floor of a downtown office building, reviewing quarterly reports, believing herself untouchable. She did not see the federal agents enter her office until they were already through the door. She did not understand what was happening until they read her rights, until she saw the photographs spread across her desk, photographs of the forged documents, screenshots of the emails, bank transfers showing her embezzlement from the family trust. She started screaming as they cuffed her. Her employees watched through the glass walls of her office as she was led out, her face twisted in rage and humiliation, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. She screamed Luca's name as they loaded her into the federal vehicle, but he was not there to hear it. He was at Aquatic Park, walking toward a woman who stood at the railing, her face turned toward the water, her body so still she looked like a statue carved from grief. He stopped 3 feet away. "It's done." Nora turned. Her eyes were red from crying, her hand still shaking. The wind moved her hair, carrying that same salt smell. "What did you do?" "What did you?" Luca stepped closer. "I did what I should have done the night I found you on that highway. I protected what matters." She was shaking her head. "They arrested him?" "They arrested her?" "Both of them." "Gone. Your cousin in Oakland will take Emma. I made sure Child Services approved it this morning. The charges against you are dropped. Your record is clean. They will never see daylight again." Nora's knees buckled. Luca caught her, his arms steady and sure around her shaking body. She sobbed into his chest, and in the distance, the San Francisco sun broke through the October clouds, turning the bay to gold. A year later, the rain came in November, the kind of rain that makes you believe nothing good could ever grow in such darkness. But Nora Hartley stood on the balcony of a penthouse she now owned, the penthouse overlooking the city where 6 months ago she did not know if she would survive the week, and she felt the cold water on her skin like a baptism. Like the opposite of an ending. She was no longer waiting tables. She was no longer sleeping in a converted closet. She was no longer a woman with $34 to her name and a debt collector's letter taped to her mirror. She was the founder of the House of Hope, an organization that helped women escape abusive situations. She was educated. She was safe. She was standing on her own, because she had learned to stand on her own, and that mattered more than anything Luca Caruso could have given her. But what mattered most was inside the penthouse behind her. Inside, in the master bedroom, Emma Hale, now legally Emma Hartley, slept in a bed surrounded by drawings of sunflowers and butterflies. The child who had taught her what it meant to love something more than your own survival. The door opened behind her. Luca stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee, his dark hair wet from the rain. He handed her one without speaking. They stood together in the cold, watching the city lights reflect off the wet streets below. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I have loved you since the night you called me at Aquatic Park. Since before that. Since the highway, when I saw you soaked and desperate and still brave enough to ask for help. I have loved you every day since, and I will love you every day that comes after." He reached into his coat pocket. The rain intensified, drumming on the balcony, the sound so loud it erased everything else. When he pulled out his hand, a diamond ring caught what little light the storm allowed, and it burned like a promise. "Will you marry me, Nora? Not because I saved you, but because you saved yourself, and I want to spend the rest of my life watching you rebuild the world you deserve." She said yes before he finished speaking. Inside the penthouse, Emma woke to the sound of celebration, to the sound of her mother laughing, to the sound of the rain finally stopping. She climbed out of her bed, pulled on the robe Nora had left for her, and walked to the balcony. She saw them holding each other, this woman who had held her through her worst nights, this man who had made it safe for both of them to breathe again. Emma asked, "Is this a happy thing?" Luca turned. He crouched down so he was eye level with the child. He said, "This is the happiest thing. This is what happens when darkness finally runs out of power." Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer. She took Nora's hand and Luca's hand, and the 3 of them stood together as the rain stopped completely, as the clouds parted, as the sky cleared. And after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. No matter how hard life gets, remember that after the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video. The penthouse hallway plunges into darkness at 2:36 in the morning. Emma's screams pierce through the silence like shards of glass, her small body trembling in the doorway as Douglas Hale's shadow looms over her, his fist raised, his breath reeking of whiskey and rotting desperation. The child's voice breaks into sobs that no 4-year-old should ever have to produce. And downstairs, 3 floors below in the converted closet that passes for a bedroom, Nora Hartley hears those cries and her body moves before her mind catches up. She bolts from her narrow bed, her bare feet hitting cold hardwood, and she runs toward the sound of a child breaking apart. She doesn't think about the bruises already blooming across her own shoulders. She doesn't think about the final notice letter sitting on her nightstand, the one stamped in red ink that tells her she owes $35,000 in 2 weeks or she loses everything. She thinks only of Emma, of the 4-year-old girl whose father sees her as an obstacle to his drinking and his rage. Nora reaches the hallway and the scene unfolds in terrible slow motion. Douglas Hale's hand connects with the child's face and Emma crumples like a puppet with its strings cut. Nora screams, a sound so raw and primal that it echoes off the marble walls. She throws herself between them, her thin frame a shield, her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "If you touch her again, I will burn this house to the ground with you in it." Douglas Hale stares at her, his face contorted with rage and alcohol. For a moment, just a moment, he hesitates. Then he raises his hand toward Nora instead. But what neither of them knows is that across the city, Luca Caruso is reviewing security footage from the mansion. His lieutenant, Carlo, stands beside him in the darkness of the penthouse office, both men watching the screens with the cold calculation of people who have seen every variation of human cruelty. Carlo points at the timestamp, 2:24 a.m. That's the third time this month, Carlo says quietly. The nanny keeps putting herself between him and the child. Luca Caruso doesn't answer. His dark eyes, storm grey, burning with something that might be rage or might be recognition, never leave the screen as Nora's body shields Emma from the fist descending toward them both. Something in his chest shifts. Something cold and dangerous and protective stirs to life. Now, let us go back. Let us understand how a woman with $34 to her name and a man built from violence and power collided on a rain-soaked highway and set in motion events that would dismantle empires. 3 months earlier, October rain hammers against the windshield of a 2003 Honda Civic as Nora Hartley grips the steering wheel with white-knuckle desperation. She's 28 years old but looks 40, her eyes hollow from 3 consecutive double shifts at the diner, her hands calloused from scrubbing other people's homes, her dark hair pulled back so severely it drags the skin of her face tight. The car makes a sound like a dying animal, a grinding metallic shriek that means nothing good. The check engine light has been on for 6 months. The transmission is held together with prayer and duct tape. And Nora is counting down the hours until it fails completely because she cannot afford to fix it. The highway stretches ahead through sheets of rain so thick they look solid. She's driving home from the Hartley mansion in Pacific Heights where she works as a live-in nanny, earning $1,200 a month for 60-hour weeks, for the privilege of sleeping in a converted closet and eating the leftover scraps from their dinner table. The radio crackles with a weather warning. Flash flood conditions. Roads closing. And the car shudders once, twice, then dies completely. The steering wheel locks. The power brakes fail. And Nora coasts to the shoulder of the highway in the pouring rain, her heart hammering against her ribs like it's trying to escape her body. She has $34 in her purse. Her phone has 8% battery. The nearest town is 12 miles away. She sits in the dead car as rain pounds the roof and tries to calculate whether she can walk, whether she has time before dark, whether she should call someone. But who? Her mother is dead. Her sister won't speak to her. The friend she had in college disappeared when her money did. She's reaching for her phone when headlights appear through the storm, 2 sets, then 3, then 5. Black SUVs cutting through the rain like they're parting water itself. The first vehicle slows. Windows roll down. And Nora sees men in black suits, sees cold eyes assessing her with professional detachment, sees the kind of danger that makes every instinct scream run. A man steps out. He's 6'3", built like the consequence of violence, wearing a black cashmere coat that costs more than a year of her rent. His dark hair is slicked back, his face carved from marble and scars, and his eyes are the color of a winter storm about to break into hail. He walks toward her car with the measured pace of someone accustomed to obedience, and Nora's survival instinct kicks in. She locks the doors. She grips her phone like a weapon. She whispers prayers she learned at her mother's knee. The man taps on the window. His voice, when it comes, is deep and solid like an oath. "You're hurt." Nora stares at him and realizes she's crying, that blood is running down her left arm from when she hit the window during the car's final shudder. She shakes her head, doesn't roll down the window. "I'm fine. I called someone." She's lying. Her phone is at 5%. The man studies her with an expression that might be concern, which is impossible because men like this don't feel concern. He pulls out his phone, makes a call without breaking eye contact. Tow truck to mile marker 47, southbound, 5 minutes. He hangs up. "Wait here." He walks back to the middle SUV and vanishes inside. Nora's hands shake as she sits in the dead car, watching 6 dangerous men wait in the rain, watching their boss, because that's clearly what he is, check his watch like her safety is a matter of his schedule. When the tow truck arrives, the man reappears at her window. Give them your keys. Ride with us. I'll make sure you get where you need to go. Nora says nothing. Fear has dried her mouth to dust. She doesn't move. He leans closer, his voice dropping so only she can hear, "My name is Luca Caruso. I'm not going to hurt you. But I'm also not leaving you on a highway in a flood. Your choice is where you sit, in your car or in mine. But you're coming with me." There's no threat in his voice, which somehow makes it worse, because this is a man accustomed to being obeyed without needing to threaten. Nora looks at his face and sees something underneath the scars, something that remembers what it was like to be powerless. She opens the door. The interior of the SUV smells like expensive leather and expensive coffee. Carlo sits in the front passenger seat, glancing back at her with barely concealed curiosity. Nino drives with the focus of a man trained in tactical driving. And Luca sits beside Nora without speaking, his coat dripping rain onto the leather seats he probably doesn't care about because he owns everything replaceable. Nora gives directions in a voice barely above a whisper. When she mentions the Hartley mansion, Luca's body goes very still. "You work there?" he asks. "As a nanny?" Her voice shakes. "I live there. In the basement." She doesn't say in a converted closet. Doesn't say that Douglas Hale has been drinking more, that his hands have gotten faster, that yesterday he called her a whore because she asked if they could buy Emma new shoes. Luca's eyes move to her arm, to the blood drying on her skin. "How did you hurt yourself?" "The car door. When it stalled." He doesn't believe her. She can see it in the tightening around his eyes. But he doesn't push, just nods to Carlo, who makes a note on his phone. When they pull up to the mansion, the gate soaring overhead like the entrance to a fortress, Luca walks her to the door. At the threshold, he removes a business card from his coat. "If you need anything," he says, pressing it into her palm, "you call this number. Anytime. Day or night. You understand?" She nods, unable to speak. He reaches out, his thumb gentle as he traces the bruise blooming on her cheekbone, a bruise that isn't from the car, that came from Douglas Hale's knuckles on Tuesday when she asked for 2 days off to work a second job. Luca's body goes rigid. His voice drops to something that sounds like a death sentence spoken softly. "Who did this to you?" "Nobody," Nora whispers. "It doesn't matter." But Luca Caruso has built an empire by knowing when people are lying, and he sees the truth in her face like it's written in blood. He steps back, his jaw clenching. "You call me if you need anything." Then he's gone, dissolving back into the rain with his men, leaving Nora standing in the doorway of a house that feels less like home and more like a cage. 3 days pass. Nora works 18-hour shifts, avoids Douglas Hale, and tries not to think about a man in a cashmere coat who looked at her like she was something precious instead of broken. She doesn't call. She tells herself she won't. She tells herself that getting involved with someone like that is a shortcut to the kind of trouble that ends with bodies in rivers. But on the morning of the 4th day, there's a knock at the service entrance. A man in a suit, not a threatening man, this one has kind eyes, delivers a key and an address written on expensive paper. Luca Caruso's restaurant. Tonight. 8 p.m. Come alone. Nora wants to refuse. Instead, she finds herself standing in front of the mirror that evening, wearing the one nice dress she owns, trying to cover the finger-shaped bruises on her neck with foundation that doesn't match her skin. She drives the loaner car Luca arranged, Carlo called with details, the keys waiting at the valet, and her hands shake the entire way. The restaurant is called Aqua, and it sits on a corner of San Francisco's most exclusive address, all floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the bay, all waiters in pressed uniforms, all tables occupied by people who smell like money and power. A hostess greets her by name, as if she's expected, as if she matters, and leads her to a private booth at the back. Luca Caruso sits waiting, wearing a white shirt open at the collar, his dark eyes burning with the intensity of someone about to make a choice that changes everything. He gestures to the seat across from him. Thank you for coming. His voice sounds different here, in this place of elegance and control. More dangerous, somehow. Because here, his power is visible in every glance of the staff, in the way they move around him like planets orbiting a sun. I don't understand why I'm here, Nora says quietly. Because I wanted to see you again. Because I've spent 3 days thinking about the bruises on your skin and the fear in your eyes. Because I have a question, and I need you to answer me with complete honesty. Nora's heart rate spikes. She can feel the trap closing, though she doesn't understand what the trap is yet. What question? Luca leans forward slightly. Has Douglas Hale ever hit you where people could see the marks? The words land like bullets. Nora's face flushes. She looks away. No. But he's hit you. Not a question. It doesn't matter. I need the job. Emma needs me. Luca's expression hardens into something ancient and furious. Emma is the child. How old? 4. And he hits you in front of her. Nora nods, one small movement, and something in Luca Caruso breaks open like a wound being lanced. When he speaks again, his voice is barely controlled. What did your father do? What? Your father? What did he do for work? He's dead. Since I was 12. Luca reaches across the table, his hand covering hers with infinite gentleness. My father beat my mother from the time I was old enough to remember. I watched him do it. And I watched her die from his violence when I was 14. So I want you to understand that when I ask this, I'm asking as someone who knows exactly what it costs to watch that happen. He pauses. Would you let me help you? Nora's eyes fill with tears. She shakes her head. I don't know who you are, but men like you don't help people like me without wanting something. Luca's grip tightens slightly. Men like me want order restored. We want to protect people who can't protect themselves. We want to correct the belief that anyone is nobody. And I grew up powerless, so I swore I'd never be that way again. I swore anyone I could save, I would. He releases her hand. So let me ask again. Will you let me help? Nora thinks about Emma. She thinks about 2 weeks from now when the final notice on her debt becomes a foreclosure. She thinks about having nowhere to go, no one to protect the child. She says, yes. What follows is a series of events that unfold with the precision of military operations. Carlo visits the mansion during Douglas Hale's drinking hours. The conversation is brief. The message is clear: step outside your house and you will disappear. Douglas Hale, drunk and stupid, doesn't believe him. So on a Thursday night, 12 men dressed in black move through San Francisco like ghosts. They arrive at the mansion at 11:06 p.m. They leave at 11:53 p.m. with Douglas Hale in the back of an SUV, his screams swallowed by soundproof doors. By morning, he's been delivered to federal agents with evidence of child abuse, financial crimes, and money laundering so extensive he'll spend 40 years in prison. The female villain, Rachel Dawson, the matriarch who enabled every horror in that house, is exposed in a viral video showing her dismissing her daughter-in-law's abuse allegations. Her social standing crumbles within days. She's arrested on fraud charges within the week. Emma is placed temporarily with Nora while the legal process unfolds. And Nora Hartley, with money left in an anonymous account and documents signed by lawyers wearing Luca Caruso's favor, becomes the child's permanent guardian. 1 year later, October returns to San Francisco. The dry cold settles into the city like a returning ghost. Nora stands on the balcony of her own penthouse, a building she purchased with profits from NoraCare Consulting, the child safety firm she built from nothing. She's 30 years old now and looks it, her face full of life, her eyes burning with the kind of light that comes from surviving the unsurvivable. Emma is thriving, attending a private school, calling Nora Mama without hesitation. Inside, her assistant confirms meetings with the mayor's office. Nora has saved 43 children this year. She has $47,000 in her business account. She has everything. except the one person who made it possible. She hasn't seen Luca Caruso in 11 months. Carlo told her, he does this. He saves people and walks away. He doesn't know how to stay. But at 8:22 p.m., as the October wind cuts through the city like a blade wrapped in ice, Nora hears footsteps on her balcony. She turns. Luca Caruso stands in the doorway, 6'3", dark eyes burning like they did the night he held her while she broke apart. "Hello, Nora," he says, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I've been watching your company grow. You built something remarkable." Her breath catches. "You disappeared." Luca steps onto the balcony, closing the distance between them. The city spreads below them like scattered stars. "I had to. If I stayed, I would have asked you to be mine before you became yours. You needed to heal without owing anyone anything. Especially me." Nora's voice shakes. "I owe you everything." He reaches out, his hand cupping her face with the gentleness of someone who has learned to be tender. "You saved yourself. I just removed the obstacles. And I've loved you since the moment you got in my car, soaking wet and terrified, and still looked at me like a human being instead of a monster." He pulls back, his dark eyes meeting hers. "So I'm asking now. Will you be mine?" Nora steps closer. When she kisses him, it tastes like healing and promise. Inside, Emma wakes to celebration. She climbs onto the balcony and sees them holding each other, this woman who held her through her worst nights, this man who made it safe to breathe. She asks, "Is this a happy thing?" Luca crouches down to her level. "This is the happiest thing. This is what happens when darkness finally runs out of power." Emma nods, satisfied. She takes both their hands. The three of them stand as the rain finally stops, as the clouds part, as the sky clears. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Drop a comment telling me, what would you do if you had Luca's power and saw someone suffering? We wish all of you good health, joyful lives, and days filled with peace and happiness. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.